Hey, welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks Workshop. I'm Nick Schotta and we're working on the Strip-Built Petrel. It's a high-performance sea kayak that's a lot of fun to paddle. I'm sorry for the delay from the last video where we set up the forms. In this episode, we're going to start stripping the bottom of the kayak. Unfortunately, during some of the filming of this, I had the levels in the audio all messed up, so some of the audio is pretty bad. In one place, it was completely unusable, so I had to come in and do some voiceover afterwards. I actually captured this video over a year ago, so there's nothing I can do about it now other than just try and make do with what I've got. But hopefully it comes out okay and you get the picture of what's going on. Strip's going to follow the shear here, and in the Petrel and a lot of traditionally shaped kayaks there's a lot of sweep to the shear, and to make the strip easier to bend, I think this, since I've already cut this strip down in width a little bit, it should be easily enough bent to make that curvature. But if you find that it has trouble bending, the easiest thing to do is just make the strip a little bit narrower yet. So what I like to do, and visually I think this looks good, is to taper this strip down. So I'm just going to take both of these shear strips, clamp them together on my little bench, and then use a plane to taper them down. One thing to consider is if you don't have a table saw and you're working from a kit and you want to take the cove or bead off, you can do it with a hand plane. It really doesn't take all that much time and does a good job. So this strip is going to go up along the shear like this. But I want to make it so when I go to put the deck on, I'm going to have a good tight joint here. To accomplish that, I want to make a miter between the two strips. So if I have a strip coming in like this and the strip coming in like this, there's going to be a gap in there. But I've made a little mark here, and it's got a dot and a line coming out of it, which shows a bisection of the angle between the hull and the deck. So right here, the hull and the deck. And if you imagine this was a 90-degree angle, you'd have a 45-degree cut in there to make a good miter. The angles vary from form to form, so we can't just go with a 45. It's going to be a rolling bevel. So what I do is I just take some of these scrap strips, put them up against that little tick mark there. And that's the angle I'm going to want. When I get towards the middle of the boat, hull shape is more rounded and the deck hull part line is more continuous. And in there you really don't need to do any beveling at all. So I'm just going to put some of these little brackets there as a hanger, so when I go to lay the strip on, it just doesn't fall off. So I'm going to set the bottom of that slide even with that little tick mark. And I'll just take the strip, lift it up into those little brackets, lay it down. Now I have a gauge to show me what the angle should be on the bottom edge of this strip. So to make this a little bit easier as I work, I'm going to just mark each one of these strips with the number of the form. So this is form 19. This is the 19th form from the bow of the boat. So I'm just writing 19, 18, 17. To figure out the bevel I'm going to put on here, I'm going to hold the strip down against the stick and look at the gap in between this strip and this strip. So I'm looking at that gap right down in there. Right down in there. And you'll notice if you look from form to form that it changes a little bit. So it's, again, it's rolling. So I'm going to look at that gap, and then I'm going to take the plane and hold it to match the gap I just saw right there. So I want to match that gap. And if I hold this plane at that angle I just saw and keep on planing, holding that angle steady the whole time until that gap is gone, then I know I've got the angle about right. Don't worry about making it perfect. We're going to have a chance to clean this up much later in the project, but we want to just get this close to start with. We do want to continue the bevel all the way out to the tip of the strip. Oh, my scarf just broke. So this is a scarf I glued together with super glue, and you can see that the wood failed a little bit right there. I didn't have a good bond on the whole surface. It just sort of bonded right in there. I didn't do a great job of making that scarf, but we'll just try and clean it up, glue it right back together again. So I've got the shear strips done for both sides. They're ready to go. Beveled both ends, tapered both ends. All looks good. I'm just going to break for lunch, and after lunch we'll start putting strips on. So lunch is over, now it's time to get these shear strips installed. I'm just essentially going to make sure they're running fair and staple them in place. I'm using staples. So the second strip is not going to follow the shear line the whole length of the boat. I've got the shear line that curves down. I'm going to let this run a little bit more natural curve. The ends sweep up quite a bit, and I want to take some of that stress out. You know, I tapered this strip and made it narrower to fit in there. If I just let this run a little bit more natural, it will end up with a easier pattern to strip.
I have diagonal lines here marked on the forms. Those are parallel to these diagonal lines marked farther up here, which intersect the chine back here at the stern of the boat. So if I run this strip parallel to these diagonal lines here, it'll mean that by the time I get up to this diagonal line, the strips will run parallel to that chine back there.
And hopefully, if the spacing works out just right, I won't need to do much as far as trimming that strip back to make it around the chine. That'll make more sense a little bit later, but right now my goal is to take some of the stress out of the strip and hopefully make it so things line up later on in the project for an easier fit together.
So all I'm going to do is glue it here in the middle and then let it run free at the ends. I'm going to use the diagonal lines
that's drawn on the forms here as a guide to get a nice fair curve down at the ends. So I've aligned the strip down at that end with the end form on that point, and so this overhang will end up getting cut off. If this piece of tape is in the way, when I go to glue it down, I'll peel it off.
So I'll end up gluing from about form 5 here to about form 16.
getting up to the chine here, and if I were to put a strip down like this, it doesn't, up flat against the forms, it doesn't end up in the cove there. The cove is sticking up a little bit high. So I need to do something to make a transition from this surface to this surface. And what I typically do is I put a strip in there and plane a bevel into it. Again, a miter, kind of like we're doing at the shear line, and then continue on. Since I've got the cove and bead here, I think what I'm going to do is just take a strip like this, rip it in half, so I can add the bottom half to the side of the boat, and then use the top half to make the transition onto the bottom of the boat. And I think I'm going to throw an accent in between those. So I'll look for a dark piece that's going to make a good contrast there with the accent, and then rip that in half, do it for both sides, this side and the other side, and then we'll keep on going. So I have a piece cut here. This is just the bead half, so that'll go there. And it looks like I'm going too far here, but I got to cut a bevel onto this. And if I cut the bevel onto this, I don't have enough material here. So most of this will actually get cut away, but it'll just stick up straight like that. And then I'll bevel that face. And then I have the other half here that has the cove on it, and we'll use that to continue on from there. Since this is a narrow strip, there's not a lot of room to put staples in, so I'm going to tape it down. So I've got to let that glue dry before I plane the edge and put that bevel on. So here at the chine, I need to create a seam between the side of the boat and the bottom of the boat. And you see there's a pretty open gap here that the cove and bead was not able to cope with. So I put a narrow square edge strip here, and I'll use the other half of that later to continue it. But you see I have this gap between the strips that I need to get rid of. And essentially I want to create a miter between this surface and that surface, which will be bisecting that angle, something like this. So there's a couple ways I can go about doing it. I can't use a standard plane because the blade doesn't make it all the way to the edge. So if I try and plane here, the blade just doesn't cut into that edge there. So I typically would use some sort of a rabbet plane. So here the blade comes all the way to the edge. So if I run this along here where the forms are, I can trim right down close to the forms and get a good bevel there. So this is a full-size rabbet plane that would work just fine. If you have my robo bevel, this has a little rabbet plane in it, and this absolutely would work just fine to get in there. The trick is figuring out the angle. I want to bisect this angle here, and I'm just going to eyeball it, but the plane of this tool runs this way, and I'm cutting perpendicular to that. And so it's a little bit hard for me to judge my angle on what I'm cutting there. So instead, I like to use the side rabbet plane. So here's a Veritas side rabbet plane. And this, see, the plane of the blade is on the same plane as the tools. So if I hold this at my best guess of an angle, it's going to cut the angle I'm holding it at. So I can just visualize down the plane of this tool where that angle is. And so this this Veritas side rabbet plane works really well. And this is the Stanley 79. This is an antique tool I picked up at a used tool dealer. And this is the same basic principle as the Veritas side rabbet plane. I think the Veritas is based on the Stanley 79, but a different configuration. This has a nice little fence here, so I can place this on the strip and run it down along that fence, and that keeps me lined up so I don't end up bumping into those forms all the time. The problem is, in order to switch directions, I need to switch the fence over. Not a big deal, it's quick and easy, but with the Stanley 79, I put just a chunk of wood on the back here as a fence. A lot of them come with their own fence. This one didn't happen to come with a fence, so I made one. And I can go either direction with this, cutting either direction. And I still have the ability to sort of eyeball down the plane of the tool and say, that's the angle I'm going for. I'm trying to bisect that angle there. And so I can just visualize down that tool and start cutting this way. So that's what I'm going to be using today, just to judge that angle. If you follow this chine from way back here behind the cockpit up towards the bow, you see it transitions from a hard chine back here, a nearly 90-degree angle, to a very soft chine up here. So the amount of beveling I need to do up here is almost zero. At that point, just to clean up that edge, I might bring in my robo bevel, make sure that bevel's pretty close. But working from here, as I move forward, I'm going to be doing much shallower bevel along the way. So here I'm doing almost nothing, where here it's a nearly 45-degree angle. It doesn't look like I'm moving the tool all that much, but it's just the nature of the way the shape transitions from here to there, that very little bevel here, a lot of bevel back here. So my plan is to put an accent strip right along that chine line, and I'm going to sandwich that in between the existing strip and the other half of that strip with the cove on it, so we'll get a nice little accent like that. So I need to cut some Alaskan yellow cedar. I like Alaskan yellow cedar because it tends to have a nice bright contrast with the other wood. So before I install this strip to start on the bottom, I need to bevel it to match the bevel I have on this last strip on the side. So I've numbered the forms just to give me a quick reference. And again, I'm going to look at the gap I see here and then match the gap with the plane and then plane away. Until that gap is gone. Make a rough guess on what it's going to be. Check it, hold it, check it again. So we want to have that bevel roll from form to form here. So it pays to look a little bit ahead, and it doesn't need to be perfect here. You might notice as I'm doing this planing, the strip's very flexible. If I push really hard on it, especially if I've got a dull blade, it's going to have a hard time cutting. So in order to make it easier, I tend to bend it a little bit so I get pressure against the blade to make sure the blade's coming in contact with the wood. Where if you push harder, it tends to bend away from the blade and the blade doesn't come in contact. So that's a nice tight joint there, and tight there. And then when I go to put the accent in between, that'll look sharp. Now that I'm past the chine, I can just start working on the bottom. It'll be a couple more strips on both sides, and I'll get to the point where they're interfering with each other. So I will just do one side, then trim down the middle and strip up the other side. Well, the camera ran out of time before I got all the way across this side of the bottom. We get about 30 minutes to get up to about 3 strips left. Another 10 minutes, I was done. But now I'm going to let that side dry before working on the other side. So I'm going to do a little bit of work here on the bow cheater strips on this side, and we'll fill in those while this glue's drying. So that's it for this video. I'd planned to get through the whole stripping of the bottom of the boat in this episode, but it was running a little bit long. So instead, I will finish off the other side of the bottom in the next episode. And what I think is really going to be interesting about the next episode is how I treat the center line. I have a new way of doing the center line that I stole from another boat builder, and it's really pretty amazing how straightforward it is. It's a little tricky, but it's straightforward and it does a great job and is really quick. So if you're interested in seeing that, be sure to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, hit like on this video. All that stuff helps support me on making these videos. If you want a little bit of direct support, I have a Patreon page where you can chip in a little bit, small amount every month, to see that I continue making these videos. If that's not what you're into, but you are into building boats, head over to my website. I've got plans for the Petrel design here we're building today, and a bunch of other small kayaks and other small boats. Basically, I specialize in car toppable small boat designs. So you'll find those plans there, my robo bevel tool, t-shirts, hats, etc. And also, if you're interested in this strip building process, I've got a couple books that really go through the details of the strip building process, and a really good supplement to these videos. So head over to my website if you're interested in any of that, and that's really what's going to support the videos the best, is buying my stuff. So until the next episode, thanks for watching and happy paddling.